I love the beginning of Advent. I know that some churches don't like to sing Christmas carols until Christmas Eve, but there's so many wonderful Christmas carols. I just think we have to start singing them during Advent. And yet some people think that they're a little trite. I don't believe that, but I know one fella, he was an erudite individual, and he kind of felt like he needed to rename them for the sophisticated folks. And here's some names of some of the new Christmas carols he came up with. See if you can come up with what carol he's talking about. And you can just yell out the answer, okay? Here we go. The first Christmas carol he renamed, Nocturnal Quietude. Got it. Good. Listen, the celestial beings lyrically vocalize. Right. You guys are good. How about this one? Exuberance designed for the orbiting sphere on which humanity resides. Joy to the world. Absolutely. How about this? Inquiring of the virgin's newborn identity. What child is this? Absolutely right. And the last one, an arrival at 100 hours during an absence of atmospheric activity. There you got it. Let's hear it for all the people that did such a great job answering them. I don't know about you. I don't think those are any improvement. But you know, it is helpful to look at some of the messages of this season in new ways and to apply them in new ways in our own lives so that we can truly appreciate the message of this season. You know, I love the description of Jesus' birth as Mary and Joseph came into Bethlehem during the taxation of Quirinius, the governor, during the times of Caesar. And in that period of time, the description has such limited details that it encourages us to use our imagination. It's like, what would it be like for me to go back to the place I was born? Any of you born in a cold region? I was born in Great Falls, Montana. It gets to 47 degrees below zero there. And it gets really cold in New Brunswick. And it gets really cold in some of the places in the Midwest that I know many of you are from, places like Iowa and other places. My favorite place, by the way. But you know, one of the things about just thinking about the birth of Jesus is just imagining if I had to go back to Great Falls, Montana, it would be just holy bedlam everywhere. You know, it would be doubling the size of the little town of Great Falls if everybody that had been born there in the last 60 years shows up to be paying their taxes. And they would not leave the light on for us at Motel 6. And Holiday Inn would not be a holiday at all. And yet, when you think about going back to that place, this is what happened with Mary and Joseph. And we're told there was no place for them in an inn. And we're not told anything about an innkeeper, but I know there's lots of skits that little children will do that has innkeepers playing the role. In my old church in New Jersey, on the Jersey Shore, we had this little door that was made for a skit the kids did every year. And Joseph would come knocking on the door, and I remember one year, Joseph said, "Hey, let me in. I got a pregnant wife out here." And the innkeeper peeks his head out and says, "Go away, we don't want you." And he was a little bit too much into the part, you know. Now, we don't know if there was an innkeeper, but one of the things I like to imagine is that maybe there was an innkeeper, and maybe in the midst of everybody showing up in town, he did the best he possibly could. Maybe he just opened up the warm barn for Mary and Joseph and says, "I know there's no place in town, but at least you can stay out here. So you don't have to have the baby out in the dirty streets of Bethlehem." So the way the story is written for us, we can imagine placing ourselves in the midst of this story. Imagine Mary and Joseph going into Bethlehem. You know what Bethlehem means? It literally means house of bread. I can imagine that there was the fragrance of bread wafting through the air. And if Mary was anything like my wife when she was first pregnant, she couldn't stand the smell of anything. It just made her sick. I remember when she went into labor on a Sunday morning. I was at church and I was called away, and then she labored an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours. It was getting exhausting for me. Being the coach is so challenging. And I had, I'm just joking, but kind of not really. You know, fathers are kind of clueless, aren't we? We are really clueless at times. And I had a buddy bring some food from McDonald's. He brought a couple Big Macs. And I said, look, honey, you know, my buddy brought some Big Macs for us. And she goes, get that away from me. So I had to take it outside and eat it by myself. And then I come back in and I'm doing the dutiful coaching thing. And she says, get that Big Mac breath away from me. You know, I don't know about you, but when you think about Mary and Joseph and the experience of going through this whole pregnancy and delivery in a foreign place, going back to the place that they had not been to for years. I haven't been back to Great Falls, Montana, except for vacation when I'm going through that area to Glacier or to Yellowstone up in that area. But I really know very little except what my parents have told me. And here Joseph is going back. And it's a rough time. And one thing is for sure that this passage is teaching us. No matter what the real situation was in Mary and Joseph's day, whether there was an innkeeper or not, whether he made room or whether he just kicked them out, no matter what happened, the one thing that we know from the text is we're invited to be good neighbors for those around us. That comes through in the text. James, Jesus' brother, tells us, love your neighbor as yourself. This is the golden rule that Jesus has taught us. And we're also told by Jesus in his famous parable of the Good Samaritan how we are to be neighborly to those around us in times of need. Even the stranger, even the enemy, we're to love and to care for. So how do we do this? How do we open ourselves up to our neighbor and maybe even the strangers who are among us? One suggestion I would have for us is just to get to know the people around us. Do you know your neighbors? I have some next door neighbors who are the best neighbors in the world. Before my kids came for Thanksgiving, she said, now is Scott, Blake, Lane, and Grant all coming? Are they bringing their wives? And what about those 3 grandkids that you have? Bowen and Becker and Cash. They coming too? She knows the name of my children. What a blessing it is when a neighbor knows the name of your children. You know, I have a neighbor that even knows my dog and likes him. And I don't even like him. No. I didn't at first, but now I'm growing to like him. And I mean, my neighbors will be in our backyard talking over the fence sometime, and we come back and they're not talking to each other, they're talking to my doggie. And if they can't get a reaction from our dog because, it's just them again, then my neighbor puts up his hands like this, and he does a little moose call. He says, Lewis, Lewis, and then Lewis starts wagging his tail. And they just get such a kick out of him wagging tails. But you know, one of the things I think is so wonderful is when we can be excited about our neighbor's children or our neighbor's dog or things that excite our neighbor. You know, maybe they're into NASCAR racing and you're not into NASCAR racing, but you start learning some of the NASCAR racers just so that you can talk in a more educated way with your neighbor. These are just examples of ways that we can extend a Christmas touch just by knowing folks. You know, I first met Marion, our alto here in our choir, at Starbucks. And I was your Starbucks pastor for years before you ever came to our church. And it was one of the things that's so exciting to me is getting to know people throughout the community and getting to know Marion at Starbucks. And what I have seen over the years that I've known Marion is maybe I was her Starbucks pastor, but she's a Starbucks pastor to a lot of people at Starbucks. And when she's singing a solo and when she's got special music, many of her Starbucks friends are here. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. You know, there's a friend of mine named Crystal who goes to the church that meets next door in our fellowship hall, Restoration, and she's got 3 little kids. And I don't know about you, but sometimes when there's 3 little kids and a mom by herself in a restaurant, it can be a little exhausting. It kind of feels like, you know, the plane is shaking. And then when they leave the restaurant, it's like, the plane has landed. But when she comes into Starbucks, it's like joy happens. And she knows all the baristas, and all the baristas have adopted her children as kind of like their little nieces and nephews. And then when they leave, it's not like, whew, it's more like, life is better because we've just had a visit from the divine presence in another. It's a lovely thing. So just knowing people that are around us, that person that goes down your street 2 or 3 times a day, driving by or walking by, getting to know them. That's one of the things I'd maybe encourage us to think about during this Advent season. Another thing to think about is to just do something nice in a deliberate way for somebody. I love the little poem by Greg Azamakopoulos. He says this in a poem called Neighborly Touch. He says, "It doesn't take an incredible lot to reach out to the neighbors who live on our block with a sense of what this season holds, a God who longs to hold them." I love the way he puts that. You know, we can reach out. The way my neighbors reach out is they volunteer to watch our dog Lewis for us anytime we go away. And then they say, we really like to do it. One time we got back and there were all these photos of our dog Lewis all spread out on our kitchen table. They were glamour shots. And we hung them up on our refrigerator, you know. They're worthy of Dog World USA magazine or something. I don't know if there is such a magazine, but whatever. You know, and so just doing those nice things for others. Sometimes you need to do it in a deliberate way. You know, for years I worked in an agency, an organization, a mission organization that works for providing education in very poor communities in the developing world. And what I did was talk to people throughout the country about what we were doing there. So in many ways, I spent all my time hanging out with rich people in order to fund poor people. And I found that it was affecting my kind of spirit. And so it's kind of a deliberate spiritual exercise on my part. We lived in Mission Beach at the time. And so there in Mission Beach, you've got these multi-million-dollar houses on the beach. And then in addition to these houses on the beach, you have homeless people sleeping on the beach. And so I just made a deliberate kind of spiritual commitment to get to know the homeless people around me, help them out with things, and to be their friend. And I continue to do that. It's a fun, wonderful thing to do. And it kind of balances out my life. And one of the things I notice, not just being very deliberate about it, but God presents opportunities all the time if we're just open to giving a neighborly Christmas touch to people. I was talking to one of my homeless friends at Starbucks a little while ago, and then one of the baristas comes walking around, and she says to me, "Can you pray for me?" And I said, "Sure." She says, "How can I pray for you?" And so I prayed for her. And then it was about 3 weeks later, she said, hey, can you pray for me again? And I said, sure. Is there a special way I can pray? And she gave me a very specific prayer request. And I prayed for her right there. And then 2 weeks later, last week, I shows up in Starbucks. First thing in the morning, 4:30. I'm there bright and early. I go walking in. I say, how you doing? She says, I'm fabulous. I said, why is that? She said, God answered your prayer. And it was just such a delight. That God would be working in those kind of ways. God presents opportunities for us all the time, doesn't he, Marion? It's absolutely the case. And the question is, are we open to the possibility? Another thing we can do just to be neighborly is to just be willing to be an authentic Christian where we live and how we live. Jesus put it this way, you are the light of the world. Did you know that? You become the light of the world as you open yourself up to the very light of Jesus Christ in your life. And so people see Christ in you as you just live in authentic ways. I love the way Paul talks about the Christian family and the Christian marriage in Ephesians. He describes the Christian family somewhat like an illustrated sermon of Christ at work in the world. And I know that not every family is perfect. In fact, I don't know of a single family that is perfect. But I think what the world needs to see is more and more imperfect families living with grace and forgiveness and care and kindness in authentic ways. And as we do that in the midst of this imperfect world that we live, then people see the light of Christ in us. I was taken by the words that Frank sang at the beginning of our anthem today a few moments ago. The world is a broken world. Nobody knew that as much as Mr. Rogers. Are you aware of that? Mr. Fred Rogers? He dealt with back pain all the time. He had a lot of resistance to the kind of stuff he wanted to do with children's education and broadcasting. He was going against the flow of Bugs Bunny and Roadrunner and that kind of entertainment of children's entertainment of his day. Have you seen the new movie out about Fred Rogers? It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. We just went and saw it. I read a review that said it wasn't Christian enough because Fred Rogers was Christian. And I thought, wow, I don't know how it could have been more unless he, was talking about his Lord and Savior Jesus Christ at all the time at every corner. But you could see how his Lord and Savior Jesus Christ really made a difference in his life as he would kneel down and pray at the bedside for people in need. And as he would attentively look at and listen and know people's names and care for them. I heard him one time interviewed by an individual who talked to him about what is it that you're trying to do with children's broadcasting. And he said, well, there's this Hebrew concept of the brokenness of the world, the fall of humanity. And he said, there's also this concept that's called, it's called Tikkun, what is it called? Olam. Tikkun Olam, the Hebrew. Tikkun Olam. And what it means is repairing the earth. And he says, what I'm doing in the midst of a broken world is I'm repairing, making repairs in that brokenness by showing tenderness to children. I mean, he was deeply profound in his theological understandings and of the needs of the world, and he was responding in simple ways like, you are beautiful. You are special, the way God just made you. And in that way, he was talking about the imago Dei that's in each one of us and seeking to bring out that image of God in us. So I just love how we can just live the light of Christ in natural, authentic ways in our lives. Couple other suggestions for us as we go into this season. What about just making an investment in your community and making an investment right here in our church. You know, it takes money to run the ministry of the church, and we are a redeeming presence in this community. And Chuck reminded us earlier today, we have pledges that we receive here in the church, and we ask you to think about those pledges. And sure, it's fun to give like one-off gifts during the holiday. There's this need and there's that need, and we do that, and thank you so much for doing that. But when we collect our offerings on Sunday morning, these are our tithes and our offerings. Our tithes are those things that aren't those sexy, fun things, but our tithes are those things that we make a deliberate decision about. We say, I'm looking at my income, I'm giving a percentage of my income on a regular, on a weekly, sacrificial basis, and that's my tithe that I give to the Lord. And so we're bringing in our pledges to the Lord's work next week together with, that represents our tithe. And so think about how we're investing in redemptive communities here in our city of Redlands. And then one other thing is, this is an easy thing, at least for me to do. Maybe it'll be easy for you. When you're excited about what God is doing in your church, you know what you tend to do? You invite people to church, right? We've got great music. We have a redemptive ministry, fabulous ministries that we support, and it's just such an easy thing. So when you're standing in line at the grocery store, or if you're talking with a neighbor over the fence, this is a great opportunity to just say, hey, how about coming to church? And I have found during this season, I don't think I've ever had somebody say, well, I'm so deeply offended you would invite me to your church. People might say, oh, thank you very much. I got a church and I'm not able to come, or they'll just say thank you and they won't come, but sometimes they do, and it's a wonderful thing. I think that when we take steps to know people, we take steps to be kind, when we take steps to just live our life in authentic ways, when we invest in others, and when we vocalize our faith by just inviting people into this experience together with us, then it really makes the light shine in our community, and our neighborhood becomes a more beautiful place.